Okay, so this is part 2 of module 3, which is problem formulation. So we had just stepped through my rather abortive and unsuccessful attempt to deal with ground truth, which actually ended up being me, not the service. And then now we're going to talk about identifying success. So my plan is to come back around and when you guys are working on the lab to show you the ground truth demo. Just to say this though, setting up ground truth is relatively simple. They used to only have a manual option and now they've added an automated option. With the manual option, you used to have to define a manifest file. Now they'll actually just, like, you specify whether it's videos or images or whatnot, they'll scan the bucket. You can actually show them success. For example, if you're going to do a bounding box, which if you're looking at my video, it's like where you're going to draw a box like around my face, for example, they'll ask you to give them a few examples of like, what was it? I had a job one time. I was doing something for my son and it was with Dungeons and Dragons, and he had a bunch of Dungeons and Dragons pictures and he wanted to identify where there was a dragon in all the pictures. And so I gave them an example, you know, of like bounding around a dragon's face, and they processed the job. And it was shocking because, you know, obviously, like once they understood the concept, it was really easy for them to do. I used Mechanical Turk for that, which again is the public workforce. I didn't use a private workforce and I didn't engage a third party. And they ingested it from the same bucket and they output it from the same bucket. And I want to say it costs like $2 or something for like, I want to say like 100 images. It wasn't that much, but yeah. So, and you know, you can set the parameters, like how many days does someone have to complete the job? What's the maximum amount of time that someone can spend trying to figure out your problem? You can set like parameters on that on the ground truth jobs. So, you know, there's not a lot to it, frankly, but we'll run through a demo of it later. All right, I'm going to open this up really quick because I just want to see it. Oh yeah, Amazon, by the way, does this a lot, where they have a lot of unpublished public labs. You're going to get a list from me of a bunch of like public labs that Amazon has, but they're not like, they haven't like centralized them anywhere. So most of them, by the way, cost less than $1 to run the lab, which, and it's totally, and sometimes they're slightly out of date, but they're not usually horribly out of date. But this looks really good, actually. I'm gonna have to play with this later. So I'm assuming, Jonathan, that you signed in and got hooked into this whole thing.
Not yet. I wanted to see what the class did.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to talk about Studio Lab at all, actually. So I'm definitely.
Yeah, they say free to join, free to play.
Yeah. Let's go take a look at that later. Cool. Oh, there were a couple other things actually I wanted to show you today, which I will. So for those of you who just got super interested, because I just showed you an O'Reilly Data Science on AWS book, I'm going to share that link here in a bit. Okay, let's talk about identifying success, and then we'll come back and revisit some of these things. So first thing to note is that, you know, we've defined the problem and we defined the metrics, and we kind of deviated just slightly onto ground truth, right, to show that like if you needed labeled data, you could create labeled data. And there's a variety of ways to do that. You don't necessarily have to use ground truth for that. You could use other unsupervised learning methods to create labels for your data as well, right? Now, you obviously want to keep an eye on how everything is functioning during like your model performance. So you want to have model performance metrics, and you also want to have obviously business goal metrics to show how your success of your model, right, relates to the success of the business. So now I'm going to talk more about accuracy later on when we get to model evaluation. So I'm going to talk about accuracy, recall, precision, bias, variance. I'm going to talk about standard deviation. I'm going to talk about, you know, classification and regression methods of evaluating success of a model, like how a model is doing compared to what it should be predicting versus what it's actually predicting, right? So don't get hung up because I'm not going to define a lot of these terms in depth yet, right? But like, for example, here when we're defining like how do we know it's doing right is like we need to identify at least 75% of the fraudulent transactions. In other words, we're just looking for better. We're not looking for perfect, right? So if a human being can identify 99% of them, but machine learning can get you to 75%, excellent. Guess what? That's still better. That still takes workload off of human beings, especially if you're not getting, for example, like a lot of like false positives, right? Because I don't think anyone wants to lose email by having it go into the corporate spam filter, right? That's kind of a joke because I'm sure many of you have lost emails into the corporate spam filter. So that's okay. I may not be awake yet either, even though I've been up for hours. So how we need to do it right. So you're going to use basically model performance metrics, right, against the test data set. So you may remember, and we'll talk more about testing methodologies when we actually go to, when we actually go to both model training and model evaluation, which by the way, you're not going to get to the lab on model training until we actually talk about model evaluation, because they really actually go hand in hand, right? So during the model performance, like you're going to be like checking out to make sure that it's like outputting the right metrics. And then what happens is that after the model's been deployed, we're going to measure how it's doing, obviously in the real world. We might still be using the model performance metrics to see, right, how many fraud transactions is it identifying as fraudulent, but then looking at like whether or not that's actually impacting the business, right? So there are 50% fewer customers in this case who cancel their cards due to fraudulent transactions. So to frame this up, right, we have a metric for what we want our model to achieve from an outcome perspective that was already derived when we formulated the business problem and then made it an ML problem, and then figured out how to feed the success of the ML problem into the business problem, like the outcome that we're trying to solve. Like, what's the business goal, right? In this particular case, 50% fewer customers who cancel their cards due to fraudulent transactions. Now, by the way, that might also be, there could be a multi-factor reason, because there typically is, as to why customers cancel things. It's not simply just single dimension, but regardless, that's the kind of things that we're looking for, is we want to tie our business like success goal, if you will, the success metric, with our ML success metric. These are the outcomes that we're looking for, and this outcome should feed the business outcome. So our ML outcome should feed our business outcomes. Make sense? Okay. So our whole focus from the latter part of yesterday was really just to explain the first step in the problem formulation phase, right? Which was basically identify the business outcome, business problem that you're trying to solve, and success outcome that you want. And then how do you identify that as an ML problem, right? And so some of the factors that you have to take into account, right, is that, you know, you really want to define the problem that you're trying to solve as clearly as you possibly can, and the goal that you need to reach in order to know that you've succeeded or failed at that, you know, solving that problem. By the way, it doesn't always have to be a problem. You know, it could be an opportunity as well. So, you know, just keeping your mind open to the possibility is that, you know, it might just be that you want to increase revenue. There isn't necessarily an issue. You might identify the barriers that are stopping you from adopting revenue. But like making yourself more attractive to clients, that's a great business outcome. And it might not be because it might be just due to a lack of personalization. So you can still frame it as a problem. Our lack of personalization makes it so that we can't make attractive recommendations to our clients. We want to fix that, but it doesn't always have to be framed in the negative. Some of the other factors that must be taken into consideration is how much data do you have? Now, don't get me wrong, even with like sparse data sets, if they have a high amount of dimensionality, like features, if you have a high amount of features, you might still be able to derive very meaningful insights, especially if you have them for more than one customer. So just to be clear, you might be like, well, for a single customer, we don't have a whole lot of data, but the data we have is rich. It's got great features to it. And you might say, well, that alone wouldn't necessarily predict, but if you can leverage then all of the adjunctive users who have similar characteristics to the user in a sense that you're trying to identify, then you can then go laterally and then use like some kind of like collaborative filtering to kind of like see where that's going to lead you to. In other words, there's methodologies that will let you leverage that data to predict what that user will do, even if your historical depth isn't that strong or it's zero, right? Your historical depth could be zero. And you've got methodologies for helping to figure out what a new user will do in your system. Do you have access to that data? Where is the data, right? Is the data representative? Like I was just saying that, well, we have some, but we don't really, we don't have a whole lot of depth of data, but I have adjunctive data from other users and we can create similarities, right? What's the quality of the data? Like if you try to do that and you have low features or low dimensionality on your data, that's not going to help you because you might not have a rich enough data set so that your model can actually like fit in a sense, right? Can fit the pattern. And so you'd be underfitting because there's not enough richness to the data for you to execute. And you could look at data augmentation or other techniques to supplement, but knowing what kind of data you have against your problem, is it available, that kind of thing is very useful. Other things is that, just remember that once you have the problem to find the success metrics, you then obviously have to evaluate both the model's metrics and the business goals metrics. Again, we're going to talk about model evaluation as an entire module as we do model training. So we're going to talk more about that, but just keep that as a general concept in mind, is that you're going to be continually like validating, like evaluating your model, both within the model training itself, and then with the test data, sometimes referred to as the holdout data, you're also going to be checking to see like, am I on target? And then once you deploy it in production, you're then going to sample again, right? So there's this constant kind of like feedback loop that's happening to make sure that you're on target. Okay. One issue you see in the DS job, business problems are never really business problems. They are SME's attempts to come up with an ML success metric. So, but it doesn't meet any business needs. Oh yeah, Keith. Keith, I just want to say, and maybe you've had this, maybe others of you have had the same experience, is that being connected with what's really going on with a customer and their experience of your service and their challenges is really hard, actually. I always love it when I meet that rare domain expert who actually really understands the customer problem and is able to translate that into some kind of ask. But more often than not, I see what you're referring to, Keith, where someone comes to me and they tell me what solution they want, and they're not telling me what the problem is. Does that make sense to anybody? Anybody else experience that? Where they come in and they say, we want containers. Like I've had data scientists come to me and they're like, we want to use containers. Cool. And then I'm like, did you know that you're already using containers? And they're like, we are? I was like, yeah, you give me your code, it gets stuck in a wrapper. I stick it in a container and then it goes out on the platform. Like I'm thinking about OpenShift because that was one of the recent ones. And I was like, so you're already using containers, but can I ask you a better question? What problem are you trying to solve? And they're like, well, our models are taking too long to run. I was like, well, one thing we're doing is that we're trying to add GPUs into your containers. So we're trying to make them NVIDIA compatible. And I said, so, next time just come to me and tell me what you need. Don't tell me what the solution is, right? Yeah. Yeah, so Christopher, same thing. So clients come to you without a problem, without a solution in mind. They just want you to do something like without telling you what they want. Yeah, that's maddening, by the way. One of the best gifts, both professionally and personally, that we can ever give someone is to actually tell them what they want. Now, expecting that we're going to get it is insanity, but asking is totally okay. You know what I mean?
I got a comment I wanted to make. One of the most successful models I ever or projects I ever worked on, we had a request from this is in one of my previous companies I'd worked for. We had the market, was it marketing? Yeah, had come to us wanting us to build a model to identify kind of best customers to go after, and we built it exactly the way they wanted it. And then after they had gotten it, they really, well, this isn't working that well because we're trying to test the response to these marketing campaigns, and we're not quite, we're not seeing like a real great correlation. So then what we ended up doing is that, so what they had wanted was not really what they had asked for, but then we found that we were able to really identify a lot of the companies that were becoming customers. So we took it to sales, and it ended up being like a $20 million a year lift in profit for the sales department. So it was just kind of funny, is that we created the perfect product, but it ended up being a perfect product for a different part of the organization that would ask us for it.
Oh, that's good. Actually, that's good, because it's like marketing probably came back to you and said, we want to engage attraction by, best companies. Like, that's hard to define. Like, what characteristics are we talking about? Companies that are more willing to engage and buy from us, like, companies that have done work in the past, new companies that are in new areas that we want to get into. That actually does, that level of engagement does sound more salesy, even though like marketing is part of the sales funnel, right? So
Yeah,
what you're saying is that my curiosity though is that, did sales use that information differently than the marketing team did?
well, yeah, well, because the thing is that we were very specific, throughout the scoping and building it out, about like, you want to know who's going to buy, right? Yes, we want to know who's going to buy. And then when they started testing it, it was, are they responding to a marketing campaign or not? But then we took it to sales, and they're like, we want it. And then what they did is then they used it to like build out their pipelines, because it was like a product where it was like a long sales cycle, and it was really involved in whatever. So they used that to build out their sales pipeline, and it was incredibly successful. I'm sure it probably still is, even though I'm not at that company anymore. But
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when there's a long sales cycle, because the value of winning a customer after investing that much time into the cycle is probably tremendous, and so going after customers who have a higher probability of like actually engaging and completing the sales cycle, that would be gold.
Yeah, because that's exactly it, right? It's because you have limited number of people to go after these leads, and if you just want to have them spending their time in the right place, and any small incremental change that you can make in that is, has a tremendous effect on the business.
Yeah. Well, and considering also like, small improvements on any sales funnel usually yield big results, especially depending on how far upstream they are, right? I mean, someone asked me one time to work on a model, and they were like, how do we win back the customers that we've had, right? And so what was interesting about that is that we evaluated the customers that they had that stayed, that had been with them for like, 1 year, 5 years, that renewed, right, annually. And then we looked at the customers who didn't, and we were trying to find like differentiating but also defining characteristics. And I have to say that that model actually, that company unfortunately went out of business for reasons that had nothing to do with that. But that model actually also derived huge success because, imagine if you've ever run a business, or you've ever known anybody who's run a business, is every person they ever sold to was a repeat customer, right? They never left, right? Because you've already won them. There's less engagement. So it's like investing in existing customers, by the way, is typically, a more dollar return than new customers, although it does depend a lot on your business. So that's a very general statement. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, Dylan, thank you for sharing that. So the model was intended for marketing, and it ended up that sales was like, this is incredibly useful for us.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess that does go to show, and maybe I haven't said this because I saw like a comment in there about like, you feel like the MS bubble is going to burst, and that sometimes it feels like it's more of a game that doesn't yield like very fruitful results. I would just say this in general before we move on to the exercise, is that I feel like in general, most of the work in IT is really useful in the moment that it's done, and then it's pretty much discarded, especially just with technological change alone. But if you throw in the business change and just the difficulty that we have in communicating with each other clearly and really understanding each other's worlds, whether it's inside of a business or business to customer or business to business, most of our work ends up being relatively inefficient and throwaway. But that's because that's just the nature of business, right? There's going to be a lot of experimentation, a lot of waste, especially as you grow in size. And I think that's just kind of natural. The reason I say that, though, is not to dishearten you. It is to say that when you get a win, even a lateral win, like the one that Dylan was describing, make sure you celebrate the junk out of that, because they're not as common as we want them to be. You know, most of us run into moderate success where we kind of hold the line. But when something actually becomes incredibly valuable, even if it's just for 6 months, just as a recommendation, make sure you celebrate that. You note it, it gets put aside, maybe even like reflect on what will happen to kind of make that a success. Because in my 25 years inside the IT industry, I got to tell you, those wins don't happen as often as you want them to. So just throwing that little piece of wisdom out there. Okay. Thank you for the sharing. That was good. All right, so let's talk about the next steps, because we're going to do a little problem formulation. Now, this is where, by the way, you're going to choose your project. But before we do that, we're actually going to practice defining like our business scenarios. So we're going to do a little hands-on exercise. So we're going to take about 30 minutes for this, assuming that my voice doesn't keep breaking like I'm a 14-year-old teenager. And we're going to take 30 minutes for this. So what you're going to do is you're going to determine if and why machine learning is appropriate solution. You're going to formulate the business metrics and the success metrics and desired output, and identify the type of problem you're dealing with. And then you're going to analyze the appropriateness of like the data that is being suggested inside the scenario. Now, let me be clear about this. One, this is going to be an oral exam. You're going to be graded. And if you get anything wrong, you fail the class and you have to leave. So some people weren't paying attention, by the way. And all of a sudden you're like, what? No, none of this is going to be graded, right? This is not an oral exam. You're not going to present this, right? And to be frank, it's fuzzy because life is fuzzy. So I think I already have this up, actually. Hold on. What did I do with that thing? Hold on. Did I close it? I might have closed it already. I think I did close it already. Hold on one second. I am not as prepared as I should be for this. Where did I stick that? Okay, here we go. Yeah. Problem formulation exercise. Okay, so there's going to be a Word doc, and I'm going to blow this up so you can see it. There's going to be a Word doc, problem formulation. And what's going to happen is that you're going to answer these 4 questions, but you're going to do it on a scenario by scenario basis. The whole purpose of this is just to get your thought juices flowing. Please do not get bogged down into like rabbit holes and stuff, right? I just want you to like start thinking about how to consider these challenges. So for example, the first scenario is done for you, right? So Amazon began to recently advertise to its customer that when they visit the company website, director in charge of the initiative wants the advertisements to be as tailored and personalized, that's my word, to the customer as possible. You will have access to all the data from the retail webpage, as well as all of the customer data. This is Amazon.com. So let me ask you a few questions. First of all, is this a large scale problem or is this a small scale problem if you're dealing with a website like Amazon.com? Don't just have to laugh at that because you didn't just put large, you put large in all caps. So fabulous. Yeah, so this is a large scale problem. And then right, so then like think about what you know about this type of customer. So in this case, it's Amazon, large scale. So you can imagine there's probably like millions of customers, tons of like data that sourcing that you have. So you are going to make some assumptions, and we're going to be very clear about that. I'm asking you to make some assumptions about it. Normally, by the way, if you were working with a team, we would write down our assumptions. We are assuming that we have millions of data with a rich feature set. We are assuming that that data is gapped and hasn't been normalized. We are, anyway, you get the idea. Don't go crazy. So the first question is ML appropriate? Yeah, it is because of the size. Second thing is there an ML problem that we can solve, and what would a success metrics look like? So for example, is making personalized recommendations based on historical customer data and their behavior, is that an ML problem we can solve? It sure is, right? And Keith, I saw your question. We're going to get back to that, right? So how would you know that when you advertise for someone, and Christopher, yes, you're on the mark. how would you know that when you advertised a product with the intention to buy to someone, that it was incredibly tailored to them and they were attracted to the ad? How would you know that that was successful? What would be a success metric? Right. So Keith, that's how you know how tailored it is, because if you've given me something that is so incredibly attractive to me that it's like you're in my head solving a problem before I even know it exists, I'm going to buy that thing, right? You click on the ad, you see the price. I'm like, absolutely, I need this. I was literally just talking about Kleenex the other day, right? You know why. So the success metric is actually listed right here. Of course, Keith, remember, I just said I want you to make assumptions, but I want to be clear about something. We're running a business that sells online products, and I'm asking to run ads against a person. So it's not a far-fetched assumption. Why else would I be engaging with a customer if I didn't want them to buy? Because that's my business, right? But you're right. Let me be clear. Those are assumptions. You're absolutely on the mark. But like I said, I'm asking you to make assumptions, right? Based on what you know about this kind of business, right? It's an online sales business. It's like Walmart online. So they're trying to sell to people. And then question for you. Well, Jonathan, that's a whole different problem, right? Because then that's not an attractive ad, right? So there is a level of personalization. It's kind of like what the uncanny valley, where it's like, wow, you really did a good job recreating a human being like in CGI or whatever we're calling it now in 3D animation. But man, you're creeping me out because I can tell it's not real, right? So again, remember, if the ad is so close to the mark that it creeps them out, then that's not an attractive ad. So we've got to stay away from that space where we've personalized it so much that it's now not attractive, right? So good point. So is this a supervised learning problem or an unsupervised problem? And why? Because we have data, right? We have labeled data. That's right, labels. All right, now let me ask you this. Is the data that they're suggesting that we use, is it appropriate? Like, in other words, will it match the intention to personalize and create a recommendation system? Or is the data inappropriate? Yeah, so it makes sense. So that's the thought process I want you to do for the next 30 minutes. Now, to kind of give you a sample of how this is going to go with the labs as well, is that I'm going to post a link to this document to you. I might have posted it already, but I'm just going to post it again. So just deal with it. Or am I? Where did I stick this thing? Hold on one second. I think they have this in the notes. Let's see here. Oh yeah, here it is. All right, so I'm going to give you basically this document, which is what you're going to work on. Now, by the way, whether you type it out or whether you just do it in your head, it doesn't matter to me, right? As long as you kind of get your thought juices rolling. So here is the link. So this will give you the problem formulation exercise. And just to say this is that, let's see. There should be a success document as well. So there's a success document. Where did I stick that? Anyway, regardless, you can go ahead and get started. I'm going to post the solutions document here in a second. We're going to take the next 30 minutes. So it's 9:08 right now. So we're going to check in at 9:38, right? But what I want you to do is start running through those questions, and at least as a thought exercise, but preferably that you would actually just like type it out, write it out, answers to the 3 scenarios that are not filled out in that document. I'm going to post the solutions document so you can do a little comparison here in just like a few minutes. I just need to dig up the link. Bear with me. All right. Okay. I'm gonna post the solution file actually in Zoom chat, so bear with me 1 second. Because the link they gave me, I realized was private, so. All right. There we go. All right, just post it in Zoom chat. Please feel free to download it. This contains the answers or an answer, not the answer, a possible answer to the problem. Okay. So just know, work on the document, but you can also, when you feel like you want to check your answers, you can look at the solutions to get a feel for that. Okay.